Hi, my name is John, and today I'll be going through how accurate my sample writing paper was compared to the actual test earlier in March. Let's get into it. 2 weeks ago, the 2021 New South Wales Selective paper was actually released for the public to view. This was the exact test that was done in March earlier this year, and it involves the new exam format from the Cambridge Assessment Test. This is really useful for students as they now know the specific questions that the most recent cohort has just done, so that if students are preparing the test for the next year or the year after that, they can actually use this as a past paper. I personally did not take the exam myself as I'm no longer in year 6. I still wanted to create a bit of a practice paper or a sample paper to help replicate it for future students who are going to be doing the New South Wales Selective paper. Because the better your practice material is, the more accurate it is, chances are your scores will also increase. Same thing in high school, where we only want to practice with things that are most likely going to be tested. We don't want to be doing things that are not going to be tested at all. It just doesn't make sense. What I had to do, as I did not complete the exam myself, is I had to have a chat with our students that did do the exam. So I had a chat with some of our students following the exam, saw how they found the exam, as well as what they remembered for the writing task in particular, as that was the easiest type of question for us to try to replicate. So after piecing back their feedback and stepping into the shoes of a potential exam marker and exam creator, I tried to create a piece. It's not going to be word for word exact, but it's going to have the same benefit of us actually doing the exam. So it's going to be close enough. But let's see how accurate my sample was actually. If you had not seen my previous video earlier this year titled Writing Paper Analysis, New South Wales Selective Test 2021, I suggest you to pause this video and watch that first before coming back to this video, as I'll be basing my comments and I guess the actual paper of what I imagine the test to be at Biggs Academy compared to the real exam that was only released 2 weeks ago. Sort of see and compare each component and how accurate it was. Ultimately, the reason why this is so important to find out is not because I want to give myself a pat on the back for doing a pretty good job and making sure that the paper we made was very accurate to what was actually being tested. But in fact, we can actually use this information for students in the future, like I mentioned a bit earlier. Instead of students scrambling at the last minute, finding out what a newspaper article or newspaper report is, knowing what the conventions are for those, our students were able to actually practice that half a year ago when I actually first made that video, or just before that. They were able to practice months before the actual paper was released, so that you can actually focus on the other text types or the other portions of the exam that you're more weaker in. Whereas if you did not have access to practice questions or writing tasks that are more likely going to be assessed, it's essentially going to be a bit of a waste of time. While other students are going to be learning things that are more likely to be assessed, you don't want to be the person who's learning a text type that is likely not going to be assessed at all. You want to be a lot more productive with that time. As we put the writing tasks side by side, we can see 5 key similarities and differences between the paper that we did at Biggs Academy and compared to the actual writing task. Let's start off with the title. So we know the title is the same, being both Chaos on the Beach, and this is quite important because it gives us a hint on what the actual question will be in the future, as well as the fact where chances are we're going to incorporate the heading into our writing task. The second part is contextual information. This is the part that's right below the heading, and when speaking to students, I thought that the container with the party accessories was actually spilled over, but this was actually inferred. In reality, the shipping container was only washed up on the beach, and although I did include that fact in our writing piece, I also included that it was spilled over. The subtle but small difference in this is that if it wasn't spilled over, that means that it's up to the student's interpretation to tell us how it came to the beach in the first place. It didn't spill or fall over a shipping container or a transport ship. What actually happened in the end? How did it actually come up on shore and open up by itself? It's up to you to display that and talk about that in your newspaper report. This leaves a bit more room in the student having to explain how the shipping container washed up on the shore. Typically, most students will generally still choose that it will fall off a shipping container or a transport ship, but if you wanted to provide some other alternative explanation of how it washed up on the beach, this allows you the opportunity to do so. And the next line, which is saying that the container has just burst open and the contents are everywhere on the beach. This is just reinforcing that the beach is now a complete mess, which aligns with the heading, which is chaos on the beach, which is quite similar to what we did. We just rephrased it in the exact same way, saying that instead of it bursting open and it's everywhere, that it's just really chaotic. Similar meaning at the end though. They then go over the specific items that were in that shipping container and that were part of the party accessories. So they name things like plates, cups, and the like. It's important to remember here that whatever they mention here, you have to also explicitly talk about those items and products that were washed up on the shore in your response as well. However, since they use ETC, chances are you have to include additional items on top of the ones that they already mentioned. So don't just mention the ones that they said. Can you talk about confetti? Can you talk about party poppers? Can you talk about piñatas? We didn't include the exact same party materials as the one that was done, but the important thing here is the effect is still the same. In the third section, in regards to tips, there are a bit more differences compared to the other sections. Notably, one of the biggest difference is that instead of being quite specific, such as in our one where we want what did the lifeguards do, what was the environmental impact of the spillage, we were very specific in what I thought was going to be asked, but instead, actual writing task was a lot more broad and general. This allows a little bit more opportunity for the student to be a little bit more broad in their response. For instance, they write, explain what has happened. This is literally just one W out of the 5 W's and H, who, what, when, where, why, which it only specifies on the what. But for my one, in terms of the tips, generally you would want to go through basically all the W's or multiple of the W's. It's just reminding you that you have to include that in your response. But generally, I think that they leave the door wide open for students to go through whatever you plan to go through. Another difference is that in our writing task, we talk about the impact on the spillage on the sea. However, with the actual writing task, which was done in March this year, asked about the impact on both the sea and the beach. So the difference here is that we only talked about, what was the damage on the sea life that was in the water. What about the water quality? Ultimately, is that impacted from a local point of view? While the one that they were asking was also on the beach. Potentially they're talking about the pollution on the beach, maybe the littering on the beach. What if it's not cleaned on the beach? How would that make us feel? And how would that impact the land animals? Maybe some seagulls will swallow that, or even some local dogs from the people from the local area. They also say to include comments from different people, which is a bit of a no-brainer for this text type anyway, but it's just a reminder for those people who maybe have never practiced a newspaper report or a newspaper article before. So that's something to keep in mind, and I guess it's a little bit generous for them, especially because if a student doesn't know what that text type is and they didn't give this tip, they wouldn't even include any quotes at all. But this is a good reminder that you need a wide variety of quotes from different people. And the fourth section is the actual question. The actual question says, write a newspaper report about this incident for the local paper. This is quite critical as the text type is explicitly being asked, which is a newspaper report. Although in our one, there's a key similarity where the details of what happened on the beach is both required. Instead of saying newspaper report, I wrote a newspaper article, which is essentially the exact same thing. So if you are given a newspaper article or a newspaper report, don't think they're really much different from that. So just write it and follow the conventions that I mentioned in this video and the previous video as well, as they're likely going to be the same. So you don't have to freeze up in fright and be like, are they quite different? Is there something that I'm missing here? Essentially, they're going to be the same, so you don't have to really stress about that either. Although a major difference is that in the actual paper, they asked for the local paper, which is quite different to what we had. When it's the local paper, you know that the whole situation, the whole beach, has to be aligned with the actual paper in itself. So let's say that it's in Bondi Beach. We know Bondi Beach because here in Sydney, it's one of the most popular beaches, even in the world essentially. If this incident happened in Bondi, then it might be the Bondi Times that was writing a newspaper report based on what has happened there. Since they said local paper, you can't have international coverage. You can't have the Singapore Times doing a commentary piece or a newspaper report on this because they specifically asked for the local paper, not any paper or international paper. So that's a bit of a key difference here. The fifth and last section that will be compared is the image in itself. So although I am a little bit biased, as always, I think that the image that they had wasn't as good as the one we had. Ultimately, the one that they chose was so small, it's actually quite hard to see the smaller and finer details to actually try to explore that in our writing piece. But despite this, we are still able to gather some key information. So the ones that they used is we can actually see that the water is blue. You might think that, oh, isn't most water blue? Well, in fact, some beaches around the world, they don't really have the clearest water. So in China, for instance, they don't have blue water. It might be like greenish, brownish because it's not very clear or pure. And no one really swims in that water because of the water quality. You know that it's not very clean and you'll probably get sick if you went into that water. It limits the area that you can actually write about. If we are using the image as a base, as one of the talking points of what you're going to be writing about, in the planning, we know for sure that since the image has blue water, you can't make it happen in a country in terms of the location, in a country where the water is not blue in terms of the beach. We also can tell a little bit about the weather on the day. So it seems like a plain sunny day and it doesn't seem like it's really huge tides or waves. This is quite critical because if there's no big waves, then how did the shipping container wash up on shore? It didn't spill over. Potentially, did a ship capsize? Did it hit something? Or was it mysteriously showed up on the shore and we don't really know how it actually came onto shore? So it gives us a little bit more information there, although I stand by my original point in saying that the image that they provided was a little bit too plain and I think they were a bit stingy with the size of it. So just make it a little bit bigger next time, please. I'm telling you, I'm referring to Cambridge Assessment when they're making this test. You know, it was like this small. Just make it, you know, so it's easier for people to see. So then students can actually pinpoint some smaller details and make a better response. Overall, there were some differences between the 2021 New South Wales selective exam in terms of the writing component compared to the one that I made based on the students' feedback. Although in saying that though, there were some similarities as well. I think the overall objective was achieved because for me, I wanted to create a writing piece, analyze it for students who just recently done the exam, as they're probably stressing if they answered it correctly or the right way, or for potential other students in the future who have yet to do the exam but want to practice that text type because they were not too familiar with that at all in the first place as well. That was a good achievement on our part, and this is quite important for students who are about to do this exam, as the students that we taught from the beginning of the year, they're already across this text type compared to other students who aren't across that or may need practice for other types of writing tasks. While we don't really have to do that, we can just focus on the other areas. But in saying that though, I may also break down next year's writing task for the selective and we'll kind of see how that goes. If you enjoyed this video, definitely give me a thumbs up. Write down in the comments below that you enjoyed it. It actually goes a long way for me to keep on putting these free videos out and providing free information for you guys. Definitely subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you guys next time. Thank you. Bye.